Hello and welcome to this episode of BSME Talks. I'm Alexandra White, Digital Marketing and Design Lead here at BSME. Schools across the UAE are returning to in-person learning, just as many students across the region have been doing over the previous few weeks. It's been a challenging time for many, and I do hope that wherever you're listening from, that you're safe and you're settling back into a slightly more normal rhythm. But this shift back to relative normalcy isn't easy. We've seen that post-COVID, where students were in a digital bubble for an extended period of time. And whilst it's been weeks compared to months, the compounding factors of uncertainty, alerts late at night, and unfamiliar sounds will have undoubtedly had an impact on students across the region. As we return back to the classroom, every teacher will be wondering how they can best support their students after this troubling time. So, joining me today to help me better understand student well-being during times of crisis are two fantastic education powerhouses. I'm delighted to introduce Laura Earnshaw, founder and CEO of myHappymind, a BSME partner, and Ruby Fiddes, assistant head teacher at GEMS Founders School Al Mizhar, a BSME member school. Thank you both for joining me here on BSME Talks. Ruby, I'd like to start with you as you're here based in the UAE. Firstly, how are you? And secondly, can you walk us through your experience of the past week and how you and your team have been preparing students, specifically those under your care in primary, for a return to school?
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to talk about the students and how well everything's been going. As you said, it's been a real period of change for everybody who's been in the UAE, with lots of changes that have happened in the past few months. But the return to school has been really, really positive. It has required really careful planning from everybody. We've had to think about things like timetables. We've had to think about things like the practicalities of getting everybody back in school in a safe way. We've had to think about things like organising drills for the students so they know what might happen if we were to receive an alert in school. But on the whole, it has been a really, really positive experience.
That's brilliant. And I said this before we started recording, the GEMS founder schools in general are always just a hive of activity. But then adding that extra layer of being prepared for, a potential crisis is hard on anyone. So how did you set a positive tone and a supportive tone for that first day back at school last week?
We really considered the well-being of the students and the families as the priority. There can be such a temptation to jump straight back into working out maybe what children have missed in school, maybe where they are academically, what we might need to do, but to sort of support them in that side. But we took that step back. We thought about the students and families as individuals, and we really thought about what we could do as teachers and as leaders to support their well-being when they came back to school. We all know that children can't achieve if they're not feeling their best self, and it was really important to us to have an introduction to school that focused on rebuilding those connections with our students, on putting our families and our children first, and making sure that they were happy and settled. We did that through things like assemblies that welcomed the children back to school. We did that through making sure that leaders were present around corridors and classrooms when children were coming back in, and through really timetabling our first day back to include lots of opportunities for interactions with their teachers, but also with their peers as well, so that they were coming back feeling like they were part of the community again, feeling like they were settled and happy before we moved on to doing other things.
I think that's the key thing there that you've just brought up. It's all about communication and community. We saw that before the return to school. The people that felt most confident about staying here in the UAE were the ones that were communicated with effectively and still felt that they were part of that school bubble, even if we were, further apart from it. I hope you don't mind. I've got a bit of a bonus question there that I've just sort of thought as you were talking there. But how do you ensure that student well-being stays a priority when they go home as well? Because parents haven't had these conversations that you may have had at school, and there's obviously a lot of uncertainty there. So, how have you been supporting your parent community in turn then support your student community?
So our families at Founders are really, really important to us, and we put a great deal of effort into building those relationships, not just in this time where there's been a sort of a difference and a crisis, but all through the year. And I think that has really helped our school because we have got such good relationships with our parents. So we often welcome parents in. They know where we are, they know the leaders who work with them, and they really do feel like they're part of our family. Throughout the period of being online, we have kept up that communication with parents. Obviously, lots of schools and our school have been using sort of apps to deliver work, so there's been that homeschool link, but we've also checked in with our families to make sure they feel confident. Our parents know that if ever they need anything, they can email class teachers, they can email leaders, they can, communicate with us about any of the worries that they have. And our staff are very good at supporting our families. So I think because we've always managed to build such good relationships over the year, when we've come to this difficult time, it's been quite natural for us to carry on those relationships and to be able to have that two-way communication with parents. Our teachers, are people too, so they recognise that families are, going through a real difference at the moment. Lots of our teachers have children of their own, so can really empathise with these concerns. And I think it's been really lovely to see the teachers interacting with parents, welcoming them back, not just when we've been in school, but also over the period where we weren't in school, checking in with the families and making sure those relationships stayed high. Because as you've said, the parents have to feel confident and secure about sending their children back to school.
No, absolutely. And I think we've seen that confidence play out in terms of developments that have happened here, allowing school buses to run and then allowing outdoor activities as well. So clearly the school communities are doing their job in reinforcing that message of confidence and like you said, also of community. Now, Laura, I'd like to bring you into this conversation now. And there's excitement amongst students returning. There really is, being back with their friends, back to their normal activities. But that's not the case for everybody, especially people who may have been in and out of the crisis, traveling from the UK back to here and being hit with this barrage of uncertainty. So, what are some subtle signs that a primary student in particular may be struggling emotionally, even if they seem fine on the surface?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Ruby, before I dive in, just great to hear about that kind of foundation that you've got with your parent community, because I think you're absolutely right. If you've got that foundational communication going both ways just all throughout the year, you've kind of already got that vehicle through which to help parents. So I think that's fantastic to hear. And also loved hearing you say that you've been focusing on the children's well-being as the primary factor, not what they might have missed academically, because you're absolutely right in saying, all the research says if children aren't happy, they can't learn and engage with learning anyway. So just wanted to give a shout out there because it was really good to hear those things. So I think in terms of identifying some of the subtle signs that children might be struggling, it's a really important thing to keep focused on during this time, because you're right, there's the kind of the excitement of coming back and getting back into a routine, and of course that's for parents, for staff and for children. But there will also be some subtle signs that we can watch for, that children might be struggling, and also that parents might be struggling as well. And we all know that if parents are struggling, so often that can get passed on to or transferred onto the children as well. So really important, I think, to look at the whole community. But what I've done is to try and make this memorable is come up with a bit of a framework to think about this, and we kind of call it the 4 Bs. So I'll walk through each of these Bs in turn, and hopefully it will help people to frame around this. So the first one is body. So looking for things like, tummy aches on a Sunday night, or maybe changes in sleep routines, difficulty getting to sleep, or maybe resistance getting out of bed in the morning. So some of those more physical signs are things to watch for that might be indicators that children are struggling or feeling worries. The next one is behaviour. So maybe you've got a really chatty, vibrant child who all of a sudden is less reserved and is speaking up less, or maybe kind of wanting to stay closer to adults than go off and play with their friends in the playground. Things like that seem different to perhaps how a child might have been showing up before. The next one is buddies. So those social shifts. So as I say, maybe children not wanting to do as many activities, not wanting to go to after school activities, not wanting to be with the same group, and instead kind of gravitating more so towards adults. Or maybe seeing more friendship fallouts, maybe children being kind of less resistant to the kind of the normal social challenges that they might face. And then the last one is big feelings. So, we all talk about this idea, don't we, that behaviour is just communication. And I think that's never more true than when there's been a difficult situation. So, children struggling to self-regulate, maybe children, having those amygdala reactions more frequently, it can be a really strong sign that they're struggling. But I guess to wrap all of that up, this is all about neuroscience at the end of the day. It's all about children's brains. and us understanding what's going on in the brain so that we can take the right steps to support them if one of those 4 Bs crops up for them.
No, thank you for that. That's a really nice, concise way of summarizing it. I think there's been a lot of content and talk around comparing this situation and student well-being to that of what it was like during COVID. I think
Yeah,
it's the closest comparison that we
yeah,
have. But I think sort of what you've brought to light is that, and you as well, Ruby, is that right now we've got the advantage of having a personal touch here, of actually being able to see these developing signs in students, and we need to be aware of that sort of longer term impact that this has had, and the fact that symptoms of stress and anxiety can appear in so many different ways. So thank you for that, Laura. A second question for you, and I think a question on everybody's mind, and I imagine it differs based on age group as well, but is it important to acknowledge the situation directly with students, or can that sometimes in itself increase anxiety?
yeah. It's a great question. I know this was a very live question when the conflict first started, and I think inevitably in the world in which we live, it's very difficult not to know what's going on. And of course, given the situation, it was very physical and evident what was going on for children who were still in the UAE. So I think what I would start with here is by saying that saying nothing is rarely a good idea. I think what's important is that we are very much led by the child, and that we meet the child where they are. So again, you're starting to learn. I like a bit of a framework. Hopefully, a nice, easy way to think about this. So the first thing is to acknowledge that sometimes we just need to name it and acknowledge that it's happening. So, pretending everything's fine when children have been hearing the sounds they've been hearing, and they've no doubt been hearing parents talk about it and having family reach out to check on them. We can't just pretend it's not happening. So naming it and acknowledging it, I think, is the first really important step for children. And then, with the younger children, maybe the year 1, year 2 children, that can be enough just to acknowledge, I know it's scary right now. With older children, they're likely to have heard more. And so it might be that you need to have, more sophisticated conversations about what's happening, but still kind of naming it and acknowledging it is the first most important thing. I think the next thing is around normalizing it, right? So acknowledging that it is scary, and I understand that you're scared, and it's okay to feel scared, and to kind of acknowledge that those emotions are normal. I think often as parents we can feel tempted to say, oh, it's okay, you don't need to worry. But actually that's quite unhelpful, because children are going to worry. And so instead, recognizing that those feelings of concern and worry are normal is really important. And then the final thing is navigate it. So we've named it, we've normalized it, and now we need to navigate it. So really helping children understand, that it's okay for them to ask for what they need. What's going to make you feel more comfortable? What's going to help you with this? And often that is just having the space to talk about it, and the space to explain how they're feeling. So I think keeping those 3 things in mind is really important. But I guess the conclusion to all of that is this. It's very, very important that we invest in the adults as well, because if the adults are okay, it's very hard for the children if the adults aren't okay, I should say, it's very hard for the children to be okay. So making sure that we're not neglecting that point, whether that's teachers and leaders in school or parents, we've got to support parents first, because ultimately, when it comes to helping children navigate their emotions, they can only do that if the adults are okay as well.
Absolutely. No, we had an episode of BSME Talks last week, and we had Ilya Lindsay from Komodo on the podcast.
Yeah,
And she said the exact same thing. It's about
yeah,
naming it and
yeah,
making sure you're having those open and honest conversations with
yeah,
the adults, with the parents, with the students, with your board members, whoever it may be. Because the second you start to bubble wrap something and sort of dodge around the issue, that's when more
yeah,
issues start to spring up. So it's
yeah,
lovely that you've consolidated that messaging. And I really do hope it is something that people take away from when
yeah.
they've listened to this show. So thank you for that. That's really, really helpful.
And just one last point I was going to say, sorry to interrupt your flow there. Just this concept that we talk about a lot here, which I think is really helpful, is that when children are dysregulated, which many children will be coming back in, actually what they need to do and what they tend to do is borrow the kind of the nervous system of the adult to help them to regulate. And so if adults are dysregulated as well, they can't do that. So I think this concept of kind of like borrowing from adults around them, the kind of the ability to self-regulate, can be quite a nice way of thinking about it, and a nice way to ensure that there is that focus as well on supporting teachers, leaders and parents too.
And teachers are brilliant at putting on a mask. They really, really are. It's
Yeah.
something that it's probably on the job qualification for becoming a teacher, but it's so important that it isn't just a mask, especially in this situation, that it is something that is genuine and that comes from the framework that you've described, Laura, and also from the community and the confidence that you've been talking about, Ruby.
I was just going to follow on with what Laura was saying with that. While it sounds like a very different context, and it is absolutely a different context, a lot of the skills that teachers are needing are skills that they're really familiar with.
Yeah.
Speaking to children respectfully on a one-on-one level, getting down to a child's level, really understanding how they're feeling is things that all teachers, do day in, day out, but are also trained on when we think about things like our safeguarding training at the beginning of the year. Those are some of the skills that we teach to our staff. So while it's a different context, teachers have got the skills. And I think one of the jobs of leaders is just to connect the skills that
Yeah.
teachers have got to the new situation and really make teachers understand that there is that, they have got those skills, they are available to them, they're in their teacher toolkit that they use all the time. Because we all know as adults, when you're in a new situation, it can feel a little bit scary at first, but once you start to make those connections, you start to see that it's something that you're actually probably doing without realizing it. So I think that's one of the things that teachers really need to consider over the next few weeks is that they have got those skills and they do know how to use them.
I love that. I think that's so grounding. And I think, again, to build on that, it's why it's so important to focus on staff wellbeing first, because you'll know that if a teacher is feeling dysregulated, the part of their brain that all of those strategies that they're taught and that they understand, which of course is their kind of hippocampus and their prefrontal cortex, that kind of executive functioning part of the brain, if the amygdala is in control, those bits of the brain are shutting down. So again, it just reaffirms that we've got to be focused on well-being and making sure our teachers are okay so that they can access those parts of the brain where they've already got that toolkit. So yeah, I love that. I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it.
No, so we were talking earlier about how it's really reassuring here in the UAE in particular. We're seeing all of these signs of a return to normal. We're seeing school buses back up and running. We're allowed to have assemblies again. We can go back outside and have PE activities. But whilst that's all great, if we haven't focused on that foundation in these first few weeks, if we haven't got that sense of normalcy in terms of the absolute basics, fundamentals of what an education is, why we send our children to school, then we aren't going to get past this point in a way that allows people to feel confident, hopefully leading up to the very, very end of term. Now, I know we've sort of just focused on why it's important to have normal, but Ruby, what's changed fundamentally since students were last in school in February? We've sort of touched on this, but should schools be prioritizing that routine and that normality, or how should we be opening up that space for flexibility and that space to talk?
I think it's a really interesting point, and I think the only answer is that it will really depend on the school, but also on the individual children. For some people, for children and adults, a return to normal is comforting and it is massively supportive and it helps them. But as Laura was saying, for some children, not recognizing what's happened, it actually causes more worry and anxiety because those children are then thinking, well, I seem to be living in a different reality to everybody else because I'm unable to move on and everybody else has. So I think that's where teachers have to be really observant, like you've said, of the children and report any concerns that they have. Like we would with anything else, any other concern about a child, we would have those discussions. We would say, I've noticed this. It might be that you will have a whole year group of children where you say, actually, the timetable that we had 2 months ago is now not appropriate. We need to build in more relationship time so that children are working with their peers, or in our individual lessons we need to put more structure or less structure. We may need to adjust some expectations for a week, for a month, and it might be that that works for a whole year group of children, maybe because of their age or because of their circumstances. But it might also be that within an individual class, there are particular children who may need an adapted plan for a few weeks, who may need some additional support through adults or through visuals or through a program that can help them. But there is no one size fits all. What works for one child, what works for one school, what works for one year group might not work for somebody else in a different situation. And I think that's one of the real key things for the BSME schools to recognise is that just because something's worked in one school doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work the same in your school. All the children are different. We've all got different profiles of staff within our school who will also need different support. So I think it's really just about assessing the situation that you find when children come back to school from both a child and adult point of view, and then making adjustments as needed. And it might be that from now until the end of the term, until the end of summer, several changes are needed over time. It might be that this week you've put something in place and that works brilliantly till the summer holidays. But I think it's really just about looking at what you can see around you and then being responsive and finding that balance between flexibility and structure for yourself, because there isn't going to be one way that works for everybody.
Agility is definitely the buzzword of term three. It's being ready for anything, being ready to adapt. But I think agility paired with that personal touch is going to be so important. It's not following trends that, like you're saying, another school is doing or another teacher you know is doing. It's following the trends you're seeing in your own school and making sure it's reflective of that situation. So thank you both so much for offering your insightful thoughts on what will be for many still a very tricky time to navigate. And we do hope that this return to normal is the reality for the rest of the term. But before we completely wrap this episode up, we always close BSME Talks with one question. And that was, who was the most influential teacher during your schooling and why? Laura, can I start with you?
Yeah, this was a great question to reflect on, actually. It's quite fun kind of interrogating all your teachers as an adult and going back and thinking about it. But the one that really kind of kept coming back into my mind was my economics teacher, which she was actually my A-level teacher, so one of my last teachers. But I really loved her because I was a bit of a class clown at school and a bit of a rebel. So she pulled me aside one day and she said to me, "Look, Laura, I know you're the class clown. I know you like to make people laugh, but you're also really bright and you can do really well in this subject if you apply yourself. So you don't need to choose one, but you just need to be mindful that getting everyone laughing doesn't overtake you doing really well." And it was the first time, I think, that an educator had seen me as a whole person and had acknowledged that the two things could be true at the same time. And I think that recognition that actually as human beings, it's important that we do see the whole person and that we acknowledge all bits, strengths and otherwise of a person. And that really, really inspired me. And it's actually something that I look at now in all of my team as well. I've got 30 odd people in my team and they're all so different. And I actually hire for that difference and I make sure that I acknowledge all of them, their whole self. So yeah, that's the one that really really stands out for me.
I love that. I love this question because you do just see your
It's
teachers in
great.
a completely different light to when you were there present in
Yeah.
school. It's yeah, it really shows maturity, I guess, in how we see school and education. And what about you, Ruby?
Mine would have to be my head of sixth form when I was in sixth form. She was called Miss Rogers, and I think she might still be working at my old school, but I'm not sure. The thing that I remember about her the most was that she was just always available. Her office was in the sixth form common room, and I can't remember any particular instances, but I remember being able to just go to her office if I had a question or if I needed something. And we were quite a big school, so she probably had hundreds of sixth formers doing that, but she just made you feel like she had time for you and your questions and anything you needed. You really just felt she was there. And she actually taught me as well. She taught me for one of my A levels, but I remember her pastoral care so much more than I remember the academic side. And I really think that links back to everything we've been saying about the importance of relationships, because that's what the kids will remember when they leave. They will not necessarily remember everything that they've been taught, but they will remember how you've made them feel and how you've made them feel supported.
Yeah, we should never underestimate the impact that teachers have. That's something we always try and get through on every single episode here, is no matter what action you do, no matter how big or how small, somebody is going to remember that action for the rest of their life, and it's going to inform who they are and who they become and how they potentially then go on to impact other students if they go into the education world. So thank you both so much again. And just a reminder that the resources page on the BSME Response to Regional Tensions page on our website is continuously being updated. So please do check those and feel free to get in touch with the BSME team if we can support you in any way. Thank you all for listening and happy teaching.